The scream pierces through the humid air of the Golden Plaza Mall. Then, a sound like a gunshot echoes across the parking lot. Every day, people walk past the poor without a second glance. They judge them by their worn-out sandals, their faded shirts, and their tired, wrinkled faces. But Jacinta, a woman who thought her wealth made her a queen, made a terrible mistake when she struck an old man in public, mocking him for being trash in her way. She never asked his story. She never looked beyond his tattered clothes. But one quiet afternoon, the world stopped. A private jet touched down right in front of her luxury engagement party, and Jacinta's whole life changed in a way she never expected. Who was that old man really? Was he just a beggar, or was he the one person who held the keys to her future? In this video, you will learn that true character is defined by how you treat the invisible, that wealth should be a tool rather than an identity, and that because you never know who might be testing you, one must beware the dangers of pride and understand that true redemption requires sincere action rather than just regret. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. The sun beat down relentlessly on the asphalt of the Golden Plaza parking lot, reflecting off the polished hoods of luxury SUVs, but the heat of the afternoon was nothing compared to the fire in Jacinta's eyes. She stood like a towering monument of silk and arrogance, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a shield against the common world. When the hem of Mr. Desmond's faded, dusty trousers accidentally brushed against her pristine heels, the silence that followed was more ominous than the Lagos traffic. Without a second of hesitation, Jacinta's hand blurred through the air, delivering a stinging slap that echoed against the concrete walls of the mall. "How dare you approach me, you filthy animal?" she shrieked, her voice dripping with a venom that made bystanders recoil. Mr. Desmond stumbled back, his hand instinctively rising to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide not with anger, but with a profound, quiet sadness. He looked small and broken in his tattered shirt, a sharp contrast to the woman screaming that he had polluted her atmosphere simply by existing in her proximity. A crowd began to form, shoppers paused with their bags, and security guards slowed their pace, drawn by the spectacle of such raw cruelty. A young man stepped forward, his face twisted in disgust, shouting for Jacinta to have some shame, but she only pivoted on her heel to glare at him. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded of the entire parking lot, her voice trembling with the high of her own perceived power. "I am Jacinta, and I do not tolerate the stench of poverty near my person." She took a final mocking look at the silent old man on the ground, adjusted her gold watch, and marched toward the mall entrance, entirely unaware that the eyes watching her from behind those dusty lashes belonged to the man who held her entire future in his hands. Inside the cool, marble-floored living room of Jacinta's penthouse, the air was thick with a tension that the expensive lavender diffusers could not mask. Mrs. Zainab sat perched on the edge of a velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she looked at her daughter. Jacinta was pacing the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor while she vented about the unfortunate encounter at the mall earlier that day. She spoke of the old man's tattered clothes and his audacity to exist in her personal space as if he were a stain on her polished world. Mrs. Zainab listened with a heavy heart, her eyes reflecting a wisdom that Jacinta seemed to have traded for bank balances and social standing. "Jacinta, my daughter, listen to me," Mrs. Zainab began, her voice soft but steady. "Wealth is like the morning dew. It is here now, but it can vanish before the sun reaches its peak. It does not give you the right to look down on others or to treat a human being like a piece of refuse." She reached out, hoping to catch her daughter's hand, but Jacinta pulled away to check a notification on her gold-plated phone. Mrs. Zainab sighed, continuing her plea for humility. "That man you slapped is someone's father, someone's pride. A person's worth is carried in their soul, not in the thread count of their shirt. If you do not learn to respect the poor, the rich life you are building will have no foundation." Jacinta let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, tossing her braids over her shoulder. "Mother, please, this isn't the village. In Lagos, respect is earned through power and success, not by being nice to beggars who don't know their place." She walked toward the large glass window, looking out over the city as if she already owned it. I am moving up in this world, and I don't have time for your old-fashioned lessons on pity. Nicholas is coming to see me soon, and that is the only reality that matters. Mrs. Zainab watched her daughter, a deep sense of dread settling in her chest, realizing that Jacinta was walking a path where the higher she climbed, the harder she was destined to fall. Inside the massive glass-walled study of the Desmond estate, the air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and aged mahogany. Nicholas sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of oak, his eyes fixed on the man standing across from him. Mr. Desmond was no longer the cowering figure from the mall parking lot. He had straightened his back, though he still wore the oil-stained shirt and the dusty trousers that had provoked Jacinta's rage. He looked at his son with eyes that had seen decades of business wars, but today they were clouded with a profound sadness. "She didn't even see a human being, Nicholas," Mr. Desmond said, his voice low and raspy. He reached up to touch his cheek, where the faint outline of a handprint still lingered. "I stood there, a man old enough to be her father, and to her, I was nothing more than a stain on the pavement. A nuisance to be cleared away." Nicholas felt a surge of protective anger, his fists clenching beneath the desk. "Father, this has gone far enough. You shouldn't have to endure such humiliation just to prove a point. We have the background checks. We have the investigators. Why put yourself in harm's way?" Mr. Desmond shook his head slowly, a weary smile playing on his lips. "An investigator can tell me how much she has in her bank account, but they cannot tell me what she carries in her heart. Your mother, God rest her soul, was a woman of beauty and status, but she loved the glitter of my gold more than the man who earned it. I will not see you walk that same path. I need you to understand that many people in our world do not love people. They love the power that people possess." He walked toward the window, looking out at the sprawling city of Lagos. "This disguise mission is not about cruelty, my son. It is about protection. Jacinta treats you like a king because you sit on a throne. But a true partner is someone who would still hold your hand if the throne was taken away. Today, she showed me who she really is when she thinks no one of importance is watching. Now we must see if she has the capacity to change, or if she is truly lost to her own pride." Nicholas looked at his father, the weight of the billionaire's secret pressing heavily between them, realizing that the woman he was prepared to marry was standing on a precipice she didn't even know existed. The Eco-Diamond Ballroom was a sea of shimmering silk, expensive cologne, and the soft clinking of crystal flutes. Under the glow of a massive chandelier that looked like frozen rain, Jacinta moved with the grace of a seasoned predator draped in the skin of a lamb. Tonight, she had traded her sharp business suit for a floor-length emerald gown that accentuated every curve, her long braids pinned back to reveal a face that glowed with calculated softness. She was no longer the fire-breathing woman from the mall. She was a vision of elegance and poise. When Nicholas finally entered the room, the atmosphere seemed to shift. As the CEO of the city's leading tech empire, he carried an aura of quiet power that made Jacinta's heart race, not out of love, but out of ambition. She waited for the perfect moment, positioned near the balcony where the moonlight hit her just right, and feigned interest in a piece of art. When he approached, she didn't pounce. She looked up with a shy, practiced smile that suggested she was surprised by his presence. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice like honey. As they spoke, Jacinta performed the greatest role of her life. She spoke of her passion for empowering the youth, and how her business was merely a tool to give back to the community. She listened to Nicholas with wide, admiring eyes, nodding as he spoke about his father's humble beginnings. "Character is everything," she lied smoothly, her hand lightly brushing his arm. "My mother always taught me that a person's heart is their only true currency." Nicholas, charmed by her apparent depth and beauty, found himself captivated. He saw a woman who was successful yet humble, a rare find in the cutthroat circles of Lagos. Jacinta watched him closely, noting the way his eyes softened. She was winning. To her, this gala was not a social event, it was a battlefield, and she was currently claiming the ultimate prize. She played the part of the sweet, innocent maiden to perfection, never realizing that the poor man she had slapped days ago was watching her every move from the shadows of the VIP lounge. The afternoon sun shimmered against the glass exterior of the upscale Orchid Cafe, a place where the air smelled of roasted Kenyan coffee and expensive perfume. Inside, Jacinta sat across from Nicholas, her face a mask of practiced elegance. She laughed softly at his jokes, her voice like honey, projecting the image of a woman who was as kind as she was beautiful. Nicholas looked at her with growing adoration, convinced he had finally found a woman who possessed both a sharp business mind and a gentle soul. However, tucked away in a corner booth, obscured by a large potted palm, sat Mr. Desmond. He had traded his tattered rags for a modest but clean shirt, watching the couple with eyes that had seen through the pretenses of many. He wanted to believe his son's heart was in safe hands, but he knew the true test of a person was not how they treated their equals, but how they treated those who served them. The moment arrived when a young waiter, clearly new and trembling with nerves, approached their table with a tray of lattes. As he leaned in to set Jacinta's drink down, his hand shook slightly, causing a few drops of hot foam to splash onto the sleeve of her designer blazer. The transformation was instantaneous. The sweet Jacinta vanished, replaced by a woman whose eyes flashed with a terrifying cold fire. She didn't just point out the mistake, she exploded. "Are you blind or just incredibly stupid?" she hissed, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the cafe. The waiter stammered an apology, reaching for a napkin, but she swiped his hand away as if he were a pest. "This jacket costs more than your entire village makes in a year. Get out of my sight before I make sure you never work in this city again." Nicholas looked stunned, reaching out to calm her, but the venom in her tone was already spent. From his corner, Mr. Desmond watched the waiter retreat in shame, and he sighed heavily. The mask had slipped, and the truth was now clear. Jacinta was exactly the woman he feared she was. The golden afternoon light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nicholas's penthouse, but the atmosphere inside was heavy with a tension Jacinta chose to ignore. Mr. Desmond stood by the balcony, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his voice low and steady as he spoke to his son one last time. He warned Nicholas that a house built on a foundation of pride would eventually crumble, reminding him that the way a person treats the least among us is the only true compass of their soul. He spoke of the incident at the mall, the coldness he had witnessed in Jacinta's eyes, and the way she dismissed the struggle of the common man. But Nicholas, blinded by Jacinta's carefully crafted mask of elegance and her seemingly perfect business mind, shook his head. He believed his father was simply getting old and cynical. To Nicholas, Jacinta was a queen, a woman of substance who belonged by his side as he expanded his tech empire. Leaving his father in the shadows of the study, Nicholas walked into the lavishly decorated living room where Jacinta waited, looking like a vision in a silk emerald gown. When he sank to one knee and opened the velvet box to reveal a diamond that sparkled like the Lagos coastline, Jacinta didn't see a man's love, she saw the ultimate trophy. As the ring slid onto her finger, her first instinct wasn't to embrace her fiancé, but to reach for her phone. Within minutes, Jacinta was live on social media, flashing the massive rock for thousands of followers to see. Her voice was thick with a sugary, triumphant arrogance as she narrated her fairy tale engagement. "Finally, I'm joining the Billionaire League," she boasted to the camera, her laugh sharp and condescending. She spoke about moving into the exclusive circles where people like her belonged, making sure to mention that she would no longer have to breathe the same air as the commoners she had encountered lately. She was at the peak of her power, unaware that her digital celebration was being watched by the very man she had assaulted, and that the countdown to her public fall had already begun. The grand ballroom of the Eco Hotel was a sea of shimmering gold and ivory, smelling of expensive lilies and imported champagne. Jacinta moved through the crowd like a queen reclaiming her throne, her silk gown trailing behind her as she clung to Nicholas's arm. She felt invincible. The elite of Lagos were all there, whispering about the power couple of the year. Every camera flash felt like a validation of her worth. She had successfully hidden her venomous temper behind a mask of grace, convinced that her high-status life was finally secured. But just as the master of ceremonies called for silence for the formal toast, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall creaked open. The music faltered. A man entered, looking wildly out of place amidst the tuxedos and evening gowns. He wore the same tattered, grease-stained shirt and the dusty, worn-out sandals from the mall. It was the beggar from the parking lot. He walked with a slight limp, his head bowed as he navigated the polished marble floor. Jacinta's face turned a violent shade of crimson. The humiliation she felt at the mall rushed back, but now it was amplified by the presence of her high society peers. Without thinking, she broke away from Nicholas and marched toward the old man, her heels clicking like rhythmic gunshots. "You again," she hissed, her voice cutting through the silent room. "How did a piece of trash like you sneak past security?" The guests gasped, but Jacinta was too blinded by rage to notice their shocked expressions. She grabbed a half-empty glass of wine from a nearby tray and stepped closer. "This is a gathering of excellence, not a dumping ground for the destitute. If you want a handout, go to the back alley where you belong." Before Nicholas could reach her, Jacinta leaned in, her eyes narrowing with pure disdain. "I should have had you arrested at the mall. Now get out before I have the guards drag you out like the stray dog you are." She stood tall, waiting for the applause of the elite, unaware that she had just sealed her fate in front of the very man who owned the room. The grand ballroom of the Eco Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk and expensive cologne, a testament to the union of two powerful empires. Jacinta stood on the elevated podium, her hand tucked firmly into Nicholas's arm, her face glowing with the triumph of a woman who had finally secured the crown. She looked down at the guests, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced indifference of royalty. But then, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall swung open. The music faltered and a hush fell over the elite crowd as a man walked in. He was dressed in the same tattered, oil-stained shirt and worn-out sandals that had provoked Jacinta's rage at the mall. Jacinta's face contorted in immediate disgust. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the silence. "How did this filthy beggar get past the gates? Get him out of my sight before he breathes on the food." She stepped forward, ready to deliver another stinging insult, but Nicholas held her back. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold realization. To Jacinta's horror, the old man didn't cower. Instead, he walked straight to the stage, climbed the stairs, and stood before the microphone. With a calm, steady hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, sliding them onto his face. The transformation was subtle but terrifying. His posture straightened, and an aura of immense power suddenly filled the room. "Jacinta," Mr. Desmond began, his voice booming with a dignity that silenced even the whispers. "You told me that people like me are the dirt beneath your designer heels. You told me I was a stain on your perfect world." He turned to the crowd, his eyes hard as flint. "I spent 3 days in these rags, looking for a woman with a heart good enough to lead my family's legacy. I found beauty, yes. I found business wit. But behind that navy blue suit, I found a soul so hollow it cannot recognize a human being without a bank statement." Nicholas stepped away from Jacinta as if her touch burned him. "Father," he whispered, his voice heavy with shame. He looked at Jacinta, the love in his eyes replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "My father warned me that you were wearing a mask, but I didn't want to believe him. I cannot marry a woman who treats the vulnerable like trash." "Nicholas, wait. He was just a stranger then, I didn't know." Jacinta cried out, reaching for him as her world began to crumble. "That is exactly the point," Nicholas replied firmly. "You only respect power, not people. This engagement is over." As the billionaire and his son walked off the stage, leaving Jacinta standing alone under the harsh glare of the spotlight, the room filled with the judgmental murmurs of the very people she had spent her life trying to impress. In that moment, she realized she hadn't just lost a husband, she had lost her soul. 3 months had passed since the afternoon the world crashed down around Jacinta. The echoes of that final devastating confrontation at her engagement party, the gasps of the elite, the cold look of disappointment in Nicholas's eyes, and the weight of Mr. Desmond's true identity, had finally begun to fade into a quiet, persistent hum of reflection. She was no longer the woman in the fitted navy suit and gold jewelry who demanded the world bow at her feet. The social media accounts that once boasted of her billionaire lifestyle were silent, and the friends who had flocked to her success had vanished like mist under the Lagos sun. Instead of the air-conditioned luxury of her former office, Jacinta now stood in the humid, crowded kitchen of the St. Jude's community shelter. Her long braids were pulled back simply, and the designer labels had been replaced by a plain apron stained with the steam of jollof rice. As she ladled hot meals into plastic bowls, her hands, once reserved for signing contracts and applying expensive creams, were now calloused and steady. An elderly man, his face etched with the same weariness she had once mocked in Mr. Desmond, approached the counter. In the past, Jacinta would have looked away in disgust or complained about the smell of the street clinging to his clothes. Now, she looked him directly in the eyes and offered a soft, genuine smile. "There is enough for seconds today, Baba," she said, her voice devoid of its former sharp edge. When he thanked her, she felt a warmth in her chest that no bank balance had ever provided. She finally understood what her mother, Mrs. Zainab, had tried to teach her all those years, that the true measure of a person is found in how they treat those who can do absolutely nothing for them. Jacinta had lost a billionaire fiancé and a crown of pride, but in the quiet service of the shelter, she had found her soul. She realized that while money could buy a private jet, it could never purchase the peace of a humble heart. In the shadows of the city she once tried to conquer, Jacinta was finally learning how to truly lead.